Hello, welcome back to Detection at Scale. Today I'm here with Mike Vetri. Mike is the Director of Security Operations over at Veeva Systems. Mike, really excited to have you on the show today.
Really appreciate the opportunity, Jack, and extremely excited to get going on this. I've been looking forward to it.
Yes, me too. So before we started recording, we were just chopping it up a little bit, and you mentioned, you've given a lot of talks on cyber leadership, and I thought that'd be a really interesting way to start the show today. So, like, what are your tips for cyber leaders, CISOs or directors, and what should they be thinking about right now?
So this can go on for a while, but back in early 2025, I kind of set off on a journey to figure out what are the most important qualities that people really care about in their cyber leaders. So I went to 100 different sources. I interviewed actual cyber leaders. I went to scholarly research articles. I went to cybersecurity blogs. And basically, I asked the same thing. What are the top 5 to 10 most important qualities you care about in your cyber leader? Listed them all out, in a sheet and tallied up the most popular responses. And 60% of them care about an effective communicator. And then right after that, 59% was emotional intelligence. So, self-regulation, self-awareness, empathy, motivation, social skills. And, some people may scoff at that, like, oh, it just means being a good person. But there was a research conducted by the Harvard Business Review who surveyed 189 companies, and they found that top level leadership that embraces emotional intelligence, specifically empathy in their organization, tend to surpass their annual revenue goals by 20%. And inversely, which is even more eye opening, the ones that do not embrace it tend to fall short by also 20%. So it's a very effective skill to have that is unfortunately being lost in this high tempo world. And then the next three were being a good visionary, a strategist, and being adaptable, right? So threats have evolved over time, and we need to be able to see what the bigger picture is. And as you look at the evolution of threats over the decades, it all started with, viruses and Trojans just sitting out there on the internet. And then it starts to move a little bit closer to home, and then you start seeing phishing emails, and then it moves even closer. And now your businesses are being attacked by ransomware. And now we have, your very judgment decision making being attacked by AI. And what's extremely exciting about the era we're in now is that previously these threats would be clandestine and in the fringes of the internet. And, they would like to be a little more hidden about themselves. But with the advent of AI, there's at least AI-based threats. The adversaries showing their cards, and they're pretty much challenging you to see if you can discern what's reality and what's not. So the advice I would give is that we need to realize that these threats are becoming less technological and more psychological in nature. So the advice I would give to any leaders out there is stay on top of what the bigger picture is, what the bigger trends are of these threats. They're leveraging your very judgment decision making, hoping that it fails. So it's always an exciting concept to discuss.
Yeah, and there's just so much AI generated content, especially visual content now, which is really, really concerning as security folks.
Yeah. The one example we found where AI has become, it's kind of like AI poisoning. And I forget exactly what the acronym stands for, but it's called the Ninja attack that was published not too long ago, where basically instead of trying to get answers from AI, you are reprogramming or reteaching AI, and it poisons the back end. So imagine you have two patients, patient A, patient B, and respectively, they have diagnosis A and diagnosis B, and they need to have treatment A and treatment B. Well, if you're an adversary and you want to cause chaos, you just say that patient A now has diagnosis B and patient B now has diagnosis A. So now patient A, if you're still following me, is getting treatment B, which may make things worse. It may not even be effective. There's all kinds of chaos that can happen in the healthcare sector with that. So that's a new rave is, if adversaries can poison the AI to either reprogram it or surrender certain information from the back end.
hmm Yeah, it's especially interesting when you think about detection and response, because a lot of the AI workflows operate on huge, vast, like sums of data. And one of the things that we have to be really conscious of is things like prompt injection.
Yes.
And especially when it comes to log data, because log data tends to take requests from the internet, and it ends up living in the sim somewhere. So when we're processing with agents, we have to be extra careful in checking for potential prompt injections and data.
Yes, and those are becoming like, very similar to AI poisoning. Those are also becoming a thing where we have to be particularly careful about the back end security and, making sure that we can pick up on those cues and those types of prompts that, you know, all right, where is this coming from? Is this typical of this user to ask this? Is this an authorized user that could be asking this? What's the previous kind? So there's all kinds of analytics, like meta analytics that should take place to discern, is this a prompt injection or is this a legitimate, prompt that's really being ran against the AI.
How do you approach this transition in threats? Because you mentioned like a really nice evolution of things. I mean, not nice, but
Yeah, right.
a malicious evolution of things, right? Like, how do you advise the organization in this world where there's deep fakes and like you said, like the judgment making is challenged?
Right. There are a lot of different ways to approach it, and it goes back to basics, right? I think the first thing we need to do is obviously be aware that, all these threats have something in common, whether they're very technological or very psychological in nature. The adversary is trying to gain a leverage of some way, whether it's financial, reputational, or just for the lulz, so to speak, or it could be political. So it's very important to know where your company or your organization stands. What are the different third parties and the second and third order relationships that you have, and what could be exploited just because, you're affiliated with them, whatever it may be. Then you understand completely, all right, this is my threat landscape. These are the types of things that could happen to us. And it takes a lot of critical thinking. A tool that I've came up with my team, it's called the C3 matrix, and it's an acronym that stands for three different levels of prioritization you need to do in your organization. The first level is your centers of gravity. So this is the terrain or the accounts or whatever that if it's compromised, it's time to bust out the cigars. That's it, right? If you completely run on AWS and AWS gets compromised, that's a long day. Then you have a crown jewels, which, you'll probably have to file, an SEC, 8K, and there will be damage. There will be, the formal incident report, but you're likely going to recover. And then you have your capability enables, which support your mission. So as you're, going through those tiers, then you start prioritizing what are the most critical things, what are the security controls that need to be there, and that will drive your team's efforts. Now going back to the evolution of threats that you mentioned in the beginning, where we talk about what we had in the in the 90s all the way to now in 2025, and how do we approach it. It's, I think, one of the most effective things a SOC should have, or really it shouldn't even be a should, it's a need. It needs to have as a threat intelligence team, because when you think about your detection engineers and your analysts, they're traditionally on a very reactive cadence. Whatever comes in, start looking at the run books. Let's see if this is malicious or not. Let's start asking questions, get a war room together. But a lot of those answers and a lot of those questions can be resolved and rectified pretty quick if you have a pretty solid threat intelligence team that can provide you those IO, A, B, and C's, attacks, indicators of behavior, and indicators of compromise. And you can cross-reference that to what is going on to see, okay, is this kind of a script kiddie? Is this is this a Kira or a black hat? Are we dealing with a nation state? What exactly could we be dealing with at the moment? And that can kind of help you with the incident handler manage expectations with leadership, how damaging this could be, and help you scope further on where else to look. But now, as we're approaching AI and all that, one of the things we need to be careful of is that AI is not just necessarily a cybersecurity threat. And I would encourage all leaders out there to be aware that AI is now an HR threat. There are candidates out there that poses some kind of person or whatever they may be. It turns out, they're either fraudulent, they're working for a nation state, it could be whoever. And on the flip side, you have AI interviewers that are posing as a legitimate organization and, only to eventually exploit you in some way to gain PII, personal information, financial data, whatever that may be. So I think we're finally seeing a new era where these threats are not just a security or predominantly a security problem anymore, but it's an HR problem. There are use cases that one could argue it's a financial problem too. If someone crafts a beautifully crafted email and they've done enough research on a particular employee to say, "Hey, by the way, I just got a new bank account. Can you send everything to this account?" And, "Oh yeah, sure." Very rudimentary example, but it just shows how AI can percolate across the org. And that is now driving, which can go into another topic here, a more security minded culture, because once others start getting impacted, then they care more, right? So long answer to a short question, but that's my approach to it.
So let's go back to the C3 because I thought that was really really interesting. Can you talk through more of how teams can go about doing that same type of exercise? Because I found it really interesting how you broke it
Oh,
down.
absolutely. So it's best to start at the centers of gravity, where what's the absolute backbone of your organization. It could be a certain admin account that can go into back end databases or backups or has the keys to the kingdom. It could be just what infrastructure you run off of. It could be domain controllers. These are the things that if they're compromised or if they're out, you're in for a very long day, like I mentioned earlier. So you begin there. And, what we do is we categorize all of them in their tiers. And then we go back and we look at, okay, how well do we have them logged, monitored? How's our alerting? Is our alerting there? Okay, the alerting's there. Now, how mature is it? Are we doing the out of the box stuff or are we doing pretty advanced stuff where we've gone there and we've tabletopped it and we've drilled it and red teamed it to say, okay, here's what anomalous behavior would look like. Here's what normal looks like. And, we have red teamers on in our SOC that are paid to look at these doomsday scenarios. And you just go through that through the different level tiers, the crown jewels, right? So now we're talking your company won't go down, but it's still going to really hurt. I mean, it could be a compromise of maybe top 10 customer data. Like, ooh, every company's nightmare, right? Or you have to tell a top 10 customers, sorry, a bunch of your data just got stolen. So then you start talking about, all right, what are our security controls we put around all of these different tiers? And it's not about just detection. I know this podcast focuses on detection, but when we talk about security, there's actually 7 Ds, a little acronym, 7 Ds on how to counteract or interact with counter interaction with the adversary. And you have first 2 Ds, which are passive, right? You discover something bad, and then, you can detect it. You're not doing anything against the adversary. You just know it's there. You found it, so that's the first 2 Ds. And then the next 4, we have deny, disrupt, degrade, destroy. Now, obviously, unless, you're in military operations, no one's probably going to do destroy. Like that's actually taking out the adversary. But, deny it, right? So your firewall rules, you've made some kind of impediment to the adversary. Disrupt, which is, okay, they got in, but we stopped them after a breach. Degrade, so maybe targeting, slowing them down. And then when you finally get, to that 7th D, so to speak, that's when you get into deception operations, which is where you get the most rich and accurate intelligence to then operationalize that back in your detection suite. So now we're talking about canaries, honeypots, honey devices, whatever it may be, where you have an isolated environment, you're studying an adversary. If they bite off of it, how would they, kind of interact in your environment if that was real? And that is about as accurate as intelligence you get. Too often, these threat intel teams, and it could be budget constrained, they rely a lot on external reports and, oh, this is what Bleeping Computer is telling me and the Hacker News and this, that, and the other. It's like, okay, that's what the adversary is doing in those environments. But how they break into one house is not how they're going to break into your house. So it's important to have that analytical mindset when we're transposing behavior from one anecdotal story to what could happen in yours. So going back to the C3, I think it's, that's the final part of it is not just, or are we detecting it well, but what are the actions we can take in these different tiers? And obviously you want to cover the most Ds, if you will, in your centers of gravity. And then, you have a little bit of wiggle room as you work your way down because you can't afford that to go out, obviously.
What's the third C?
capability enablers. So these are the things that, it helps you, and it enables your mission, right? It supports it in some way, shape, or form. You think of it, something as simple as maybe an AWS and Lambda, right? These automated scripts that kick off when conditions are met. If one of them gets wiped out, well, it'll be a busy day trying to get it back, but you'll be okay. It's likely transparent to your customers if you're some kind of service provider in some way, shape, or form, and it's highly likely you're going to recover. So all those tiers are based off, impact, recoverability, the likelihood of filing an SEC 8K. So the more that are true, so to speak, or the more that are highly, scored, the higher the tier they are.
Yeah, I like this framing a lot. It's a good prioritization for a lot of people listening. So definitely going to steal that in the future. One of the things as well that I thought was really interesting that you said before was you're saying that every SOC needs a threat intelligence team. And I think the way I interpreted that is the threat intelligence team's job is to do this sort of proactive exploration and say, well, what are the things that we actually need to detect?
Mhm.
I personally think that every detection team needs to do that too. But
Yes.
do you think that the need for a threat intelligence team is a reaction to the detection teams being so overwhelmed and they don't have the time to do that?
Not necessarily. I would argue that intelligence is a different discipline than cybersecurity operations, right? So the blue teaming, the incident response, it's a very different mindset. So you'll see a lot of engineering take place with the blue teamers, tuning and crafting these rules, and kind of think, and like I said, prioritizing using a C3 matrix, whatever their strategy is. But intelligence, I mean, I come from a 10.5 year Air Force background, and cyber and intel, even cyber security and cyber intel were two different, career codes. We'll call it an AFSC in the Air Force, because one is highly analytical. It's the system two thinking in your brain where you have to dig deep, do this critical thinking. It's a lot of pattern analysis. And they're not necessarily there just because, we have the operations guys. They're there because we need to start, as an industry, we need to start pivoting from reactive to proactive. They're really there to make our future lives easier. That if we know what's coming ahead of time, then the ones that, are crafting these security trolls and detections and alerts and, the other D's of the counter interactions, that's going to take a lot less time and not a lot less time, but it's going to be much less stressful for them in the future because of the quality of intel that's provided. And I know I've said threat intelligence throughout this podcast, but only because that's an industry, recognizable term. But a very mature team should be a threat operations team. So it's not just, oh, we got this great intel, here you go. It's like, well, what are you doing with that intel? How are you making it an operational capability? You're not just telling, your vulnerability management team, hey, we found out this CVE has got some chatter on the dark web and you should raise it from a medium to a high. It's not just that. It's not just, oh, someone found a cure ransomware with these IOCs. No, it's not being a Google expert or an NVD expert. It is a very systematic process where you are deliberately trying to put together indicators regardless of what they are. I mean, I'll speak diamond model terms: infrastructure, capabilities, victimology, to assemble a profile and defend against a tradecraft, not a person, right? Or not an adjective animal like CrowdStrike with fuzzy panda or whatever they call it, because how they behave in one environment is going to be different than yours. So deception operations is big on that. And it's not just staying at the tactical level, but as a threat operations team, you have a responsibility to inform your upper level leadership of the threats that are out there so that they can make the appropriate budgetary and training and equipment and tooling decisions to make sure you're properly defended against that to protect the business. So it's one of those rare teams that they need to be analytical, they need to know cybersecurity, and they need to have effective communication up at the top to, on the back end, look out for the company, kind of from the shadows, so to speak.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely much more analytical, much more like scenario driven, like weighing the different risks and then really digging into how attackers have moved historically in other environments. Yeah, I'm in
Yeah.
full agreement there.
And you can also, if you evolve far enough, you can also have a threat emulation capability where you study what these guys do and you can replicate it in a controlled environment to see if your detections and denials, if they'll fire. And if they don't, you have to figure out why. And that's where, we start to get into purple teaming a little bit. And it's not just verbal tabletops, but it's technical tabletops, which are a lot more fun.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of red teaming, something that I've personally been playing around a lot with is Stratus Red Team, which is
All right.
a red teaming tool I think that Datadog put out. But
Okay.
in that tool, it's effectively emulating certain MITRE tactics and techniques. And the reason I've been playing around with it is that we need some way of evaluating our AI SOC analyst agent and our other, detection engineering and Copilot and things like that. Like we have a bunch of different AI agents in Panther, and it often requires like realistic data. The problem is that AI models are so good that they can easily spot that it's a red teaming tool. Just
Right.
be like, this is I'm ignoring this. Like this is obviously red teaming. This is fake. This isn't a real attacker. I'm just like, man, I got to get more clever, I
And
guess.
And what's unique about that is historically in pen tests, in a traditional SOC before the advent of AI, you would spend a ludicrous amount of money for someone to come in and pen test your environment, and they'll say we found this, and your controls may not pick up on everything because, the red teamers are that good, but now with AI, well, now they can say, well, we've already seen this and these kind of behavior. So when another pen test comes through, it's like, oh yeah, it's a pen test. I see how they're behaving. It's that kind of domain, likelihood of it be, so they're doing the internal calculus pretty quick to just, say, all right, go ahead, have fun, pen testers. Like, no, we don't, that's not the intended goal here. But yeah, so that's one of the challenges of having such, I guess, I don't want to say intelligent AI because that's redundant, but very, very astute models is being able to discern what's kind of, benevolent red teaming versus, okay, this is actually adversarial behavior.
Yeah. And it actually kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier around prompt injection, because you could think of an adversary trying to have that effect, right? Like, oh, I'm going to use an obvious testing tool so the agent picks it up. Yeah, it's challenging. There's a lot of techniques that we have to employ to make sure that doesn't happen, but that's why we're testing, right? Like that's why we do tests like that.
And that's where, I sometimes talk to my team. If you look at, there's a model out there called Bloom's taxonomy of education, right? And there's 6 steps of knowing something, right? You know it, then you comprehend, you apply it, you analyze it, and then you evaluate. And then at the very top, you can create. And I would almost offer that AI kind of falls short after step 4. AI has knowledge, AI can comprehend and apply, and it can analyze, obviously. But then evaluation is where we get into, buzzwords like, well, you have to validate what it spits out and, and justify and defend a stance on something. And, AI, I don't think has reached that level yet. So when we talk about, the possibility of, oh, will AI ever replace blue team analysts? And like, it may replace some of the work that blue team needs to do, and it will expedite it. It will collect all these indicators and maybe say this might be what's going on. But you still need that critical thinker in front of the, behind the screen or in front of the screen that can discern, okay, this was accurate, or nope, this was a pen test going on that it hasn't learned yet, or nope, that's a developer. They forgot to tell us that they're running a crazy script in PowerShell. Don't worry about it. Yes, we know. So I think that's where AI has yet to reach, is that 5th step of, that educational model with Bloom. So it's getting there. It's come a long way in the past several years, but I do not foresee it completely replacing an analyst. And another reason why is because, these folks that like to say, oh, we have an AI bot, it's going to make your life so much easier. Maybe one day you won't need a blue team analyst. Well, what's going to happen is that you'll onboard this product, and then the product is going to need to learn your environment for a very long time to get some kind of understanding of what normal is. And even so, by the time it understands what normal is, well, the adversary is already ahead of that and throwing new behaviors and new indicators and new infrastructure. And so, we're kind of in this race of how fast can the AI learn versus the enormous pool of adversaries out there that are developing new tradecraft on the daily. So it's almost like an AI versus adversary arms race, defense versus offense.
So let's go a little deeper into this conversation because it's one that I find very interesting.
Yeah.
Where are you on that spectrum of you've successfully added an AI agent somewhere in your security operations that has significantly improved like your team's effectiveness and throughput?
Yeah. And so we have several of our security tools that have, that now have AI agents in them already. Not anything we've built, but it was like, hey, now we have the AI bot. Like, okay, cool. And without going into detail, basically what they've done is that they've really cut down the time of analyzing, okay, is this a false positive or is this potentially legitimate? And where it's also really helped is the aggregation of, like I said, intelligence and our IOC database we have, and integrating that into, an incident case and seeing, all right, well, this is a lot more serious, or this, is likely maybe a script kiddie, or it could be something else that we've seen in the past. So what I've been really impressed with AI is the ability to assimilate several different behaviors and be able to pivot off of different concerns throughout the incident case, and to give us more enrichment without us having to go to, every single tool. And, because the SIM, in a perfect world, it ingests the EDR, it ingests your DLP, it ingests your vulnerability management tool, everything. And so being able to just use AI from your SIM that's supposed to be looking from everywhere or taking in everything, that helps a lot, where I can just say, like, okay, yeah, this user's a little bit suspicious. What was his processes run and all of that. So I don't have to actually pivot to my AV EDR tool and start digging through that as well. Now, I think those skills are certainly still valuable, because if your SIM ever goes down, well, you don't want to be, whoops, I just relied on AI. I have no idea how to work an AV tool anymore, or, or DLP. So, there's value behind that. And plus, I mean, SIMs can start being, more of a target now anywhere. SIM providers, knowing that more are becoming AI centric, and adversaries maybe don't want to be detected as quickly. So it is about the contingency operations as well. So, yeah.
But Mike, AI is never going to go down. We're never going to be in the situation where we don't have it, right?
I just saw Tron Ares last night, and I can confirm AI can go down.
We just had US East 1 go down recently. So
Great.
yeah, it's always funny when an AI service becomes unavailable. You're like, oh, I have to remember how to code again.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. So, and it's a heck of a weapon we've created. And I equate AI to, the dawn of the deep web. And it may be a crazy comparison, but the deep web was actually created by US naval intelligence, because they did not want, it needed to be so encrypted, and they needed a private channel that wouldn't risk exposure on the surface web. Well, then they thought, uh-oh, well, if someone does breach this network, they're going to see all kinds of stuff. So what if we just open it up to everybody and have certain, walled off servers and all that? But again, so you look at the intended purpose and how it has evolved over time, what the deep web has become over time, and you can almost see a very similar progression with AI. It should be a supporting function, was probably its original intent, is to make decisions quicker, bring information quicker. But now, we see, like I mentioned before, the Ninja attack, and you mentioned AI prompt injections, and now targeting AI bots so that you can't get detected. Now it's become morphed to something that could be used in a malicious way. So this is nothing we haven't seen before in the world of cybersecurity. It's just, I say this very boldly, it's same song, different verse. We have to adapt and think of all the possible ways it could be misused, because if it wasn't for adversaries, you and I would not have a job. So we have to think about how they're going to behave with it.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on in saying, same song, different verse, because when a lot of the transitions to the cloud were happening, we were thinking about, oh, well, now attackers are going to use the cloud against us, and they certainly have done that throughout,
Yeah.
the last 10 years.
Yeah. There's a lot more obscurity and clandestine maneuvering that can happen with the help of AI. And you can even think of possibilities where people are injecting AI-based malware, and it's just sitting on your network for a while, learning how your network flows, who's got admin accounts, who's got services, poke around a little bit. And then after living around for a couple of months, just send that information it's learned back to the controller with the recommended list of exploits. I do not see that as too far off anymore. unfortunately.
Yeah, it's definitely highly dynamic and changing every day. And then also because the model capabilities are rapidly evolving, that also, has benefits for us as defenders, but it also, opens up, those models to be used by attackers, especially the open source models that may not have the same level of safety as a hosted model provider.
Right.
So yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic.
Absolutely.
What you were saying about the sim applying I like wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, this is obviously where we focus. Like we've been building sim for a very long time. It's a very hard thing to build, but applying AI on top of it just makes everything so much faster, more efficient. So I'm curious, like, where are you seeing the biggest uplift of using AI in your team in terms of those gains?
Yeah, the biggest one is most definitely source. I guess you can say source gathering or source interpretation or tool source information. So what I mean by that is, in the pre AI era SOC, if you have an alert, it'll just give you, just the information you need, and you have to go to the source or a couple sources and see what's going on. Let's think about this. You have a potential insider threat, right? If you really want to see if they've been doing some weird stuff, what are all the things you have to look at? You're going to have to look at whatever's installed on their actual, workstation logs. And that might mean CrowdStrike. And then you want to look at their browsing history. You want to look at there's any DLP alerts. You want to look at, so many different things, and that could be a lot of different pulls from a lot of different places. And, you know, but with AI, you can say, all right, give me all the information about this particular individual and what they've done over the last 30 days, as well as any concerning indicators, any new install, you got to be specific with your prompt. But if you get it down, oh my goodness, it can read all that, give it to you without having to have 50,000 tabs open because you got to go to each individual tool, and that's taking time. And if this is a very sensitive case, or, you're up against the clock, then it's concerning. Imagine if you have someone who just had, that's something I've preached about before in cyber leadership talks is the insider, the insider threat, or the insider risk threat is, imagine a scenario where someone decides, hey, you know what? Had enough after that awful check-in, and I'm done with this place in a couple days. Like, whoa, and you have maybe 48, 72 hours to see what they've done and where they've been to. And oh, guess what? They have admin and service account, access to where they've gone there, and you have to analyze logs. All this hopefully before they're out the door. So in very time sensitive situations, that's where you're going to see the most ROI is, a quicker aggregation of logs, quicker decision making, and a quicker, protection factor, if you will, for your company, especially if you have folks that have access to source code or, proprietary info that can get fairly ugly fairly quick.
I 100% agree that that translation layer and then all the agentic tool calling that happens as a result of those integrations is a massive, massive improvement.
Yeah. And then the entire time, I always tell to be an effective leader in that, stressful environment where you have so much going on, you need to make sure that the number one reason that folks quit does not happen to your org, which is burnout, right? So I said in the beginning that adaptability is extremely important in this world. And if, as a leader, if you don't adapt and pivot your strategy to what's out there without chasing every shiny object, but looking at a big picture, you run that risk of the burnout. So it's important to make sure that those folks are their time is well spent. And when you are in the middle of an incident, you communicate those expectations very effectively to your upper leadership. Like, okay, I'm going to give you 2 hour, 2 hour updates. And unless there's a major finding, then, you'll hear from me. But with AI, you can probably, up that frequency or, have something result a lot sooner. And that does help a lot with, the anti-burnout or the inverse of it, where they're okay, well, wow, that incident was done and figured out in an hour instead of 2 days. So the only concern I can see from a customer perspective of using AI in a security tool is obviously doing a thorough check on the vendor's backend security, knowing, what their LLM infrastructure, how they feed it, where the data goes, how that's protected. So that I can imagine from a customer perspective would be top of mind because that's That's another way. I mean, imagine if someone breaches your organization and can get into your AI model. It's like, well, they know everything about all the customers and their concerns. Like that's more than a gold mine. It's a platinum mine of information.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very good call. Mike, I'd love to wrap this episode with 3 pieces of advice for folks listening in.
So 3 pieces of advice I would say going forward for any, at least cyber leader or aspiring cyber leader is one, you're not going to have a successful SOC without training your folks up. I wholeheartedly agree with that. You can have the most flashy tools out there and the best AI, but if your folks aren't trained and they're not current with the threats out there, you're already behind. Secondly, is to give a solid purpose to your team of what you're doing. So, why are they coming in every day? It shouldn't be just to collect a paycheck, but there should be, like I mentioned earlier, some kind of emotional intelligence put into that. You need to motivate them. You need to have that, the empathy, and you need to give them a reason why they're there. And, the reason we've come up with our vision statement, one of our tenets is to deter adversaries. And we picked that single word, deter, very deliberately, because it's impossible to patch every single vulnerability and every hole that exists, especially when you have such big enterprise. But you want to make it so difficult that you demotivate and almost demoralize the adversary, where they're like, forget it. I don't want to bother with Veeva. I want to go to a softer target. That was too difficult. And it shouldn't be that hard, right? That's what you want them to be, demotivated to come in. And then the third one is that, there's going to be a point in your career where you're going to face challenges that your entire cybersecurity career has not prepared you for. And I preach this all the time, where there's so many books out there that say, oh, if you want to be the best cybersecurity engineer or leader or whatever, then you need to do these 3 things or 5 things or whatever. While all of those are incredible stories, most of those stories are highly anecdotable, and they're based off a very specific sequence of events that have transpired for that author that can't be reproduced. It can't be replicated. And so all of their success is based on what they knew and their experience at that time. So what I'm saying is, as you go through your career, you need to realize that there will be moments where you weren't trained for this. You're going to, be in the middle of an incident, and it's going to be the big one. And suddenly your boss is sick and the next boss is, and the one technical person that can do something isn't there. So I say all that to emphasize the principle of defense in personnel, where the SOC is typically so stovepiped, where one person does the SIM and one does the SOAR and one does DLP and AV, and that's it. So I say all that to emphasize there needs to be some kind of cross-functional training program where folks are multifaceted, they're confident in what they do, there's drilling, there's practice, and they have the right analytical mindset, not tool-centric mindset of, what could possibly be going on. And they need to stay open-minded about the different possibilities and not get too conditioned to what they think is happening. Because everyone's, like I said, you're going to hit that point in the career where you're getting the very, esoteric incident you've never seen before, and it's going to force you to be open-minded. But it needs to be met with a calm head and, a very strong, level-headed approach. So that's the advices I can give.
I've never heard defense and personnel before, but I'm definitely stealing that. That's a good one.
Go for it. Yeah. So we all hear defense in depth, and that speaks to the tech stack, but you need defense and personnel. You need more than one person, more than really 2 people, I would offer, to know each capability. Because all you need is, all right, one's sick, the other's on PTO. Well, we'll figure the incident out tomorrow because, no one else knows how to look at CrowdStrike or whatever. Not the best approach. So it's in personnel is key.
That's actually a pretty big benefit, though, of using agents now, right? Because the knowledge is so deep.
Correct.
So you can start delegating things like that, and then you can start getting that cross training too, which is a very nice side effect.
Absolutely.
Mike, this has been a great conversation, very inspiring. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated having you on the show. And I just want to end by reminding folks that the show is put on by Panther, the company that I founded in 2018, cybersecurity company. We provide an AI SOC platform that honestly has a lot of the things we talked about today. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you can go to panther.com. Mike, thank you so much again for your time. It was amazing chatting with you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity. Take care, everybody.
See ya.